Let's talk about explaining the documents that summarize the transaction financially. In a prior segment of this course, we discussed how to prepare the closing disclosure, ALTA settlement statement, and HUD-1 settlement statement. Of course, knowing how to prepare these documents is a great foundation to explaining them to the consumer, but it is not the same. We would never want to explain all the technical rules and details that influence our preparation of these documents. The closing would last for hours and the consumer would become exasperated. That would be giving too much information. But we do not want to fall too far on the other end of the spectrum either by giving too little information or no information. Imagine how you would feel as a consumer if at your closing, a settlement agent entered the room, plopped in front of you a 2-inch thick stack of settlement papers on top of a beautiful mahogany conference table and said, "Keep signing until you hit wood. I'll be back in half an hour." Well, obviously, we need to strike the appropriate balance. But how much information is enough? Reasonable people will disagree about the answer to this question. The purpose of this program is to help you answer that question for yourself by reviewing these documents and sample scripts that you can fine-tune to your own tastes. Whether you're explaining the closing disclosure, the ALTA settlement statement, or the HUD-1 settlement statement, there are a few comments that can be said overall. First, learn to read upside down. Alternatively, sit side by side with the consumer. This process is all about the consumer, so make this process as easy as possible by literally being on the same page, by sharing this document as you explain it and having the document oriented towards the consumer. When talking about important facts and figures, point to them with a pen so that they can be seen by the consumer in black and white. Pointing to something visual also helps the consumer stay focused and follow along. Don't read the numbers. This can come across as condescending or tedious, and it takes up too much valuable time. Just point to them and identify what it is. For example, say to the seller, "This is your payoff to Chase," and then point to the number. But don't say, "This is your payoff to Chase in the amount of $183,466.34. Go slow and steady on these documents in accordance with the pace that is appropriate for the consumer. Most people find a bunch of numbers on tiny lines intimidating, and this might be compounded by a host of other factors that can make a closing stressful. Going slow and steady on these documents to make sure that the consumer understands where all the money comes and goes will earn the consumer's trust and make the rest of the closing easier. Conversely, if the consumer feels rushed or confused, the closing can become more difficult than it needs to be. In the end, some consumers are sophisticated and in a hurry. They may say to you, "I reviewed the draft CD and all these numbers look the same. I'm just ready to sign." Well, if that happens, you can always just give the consumer the level of information he or she desires. And finally, review and sign these financial documents first. Generally speaking, if the consumer feels that these are correct, then 80% of the consumer's concerns are relieved. Let's go through the closing disclosure. The following is an example of how the closing disclosure might be explained. In order to be consistent with the example provided by the CFPB along with the instructions on how to prepare a CD, we use that same CD here, which can be found in your appendix. However, please note that some of the fees on this sample CD are not realistic for Virginia transactions. Nevertheless, we focus here on form, how to explain the CD, really not on substance, the kind of fees being explained. As if you were reviewing this document with the consumer, a picture will illustrate to you what you would be pointing with your pen to focus the consumer's attention. After the picture, a sample script will be given that could be said to the consumer. And then if I have any commentary, well, then that will follow. So let's begin. Handing out a closing disclosure to everyone in the room, you might say something like this. I'd like to go over the closing disclosure first, which summarizes the transaction. I'd like to review the purchaser side first, and then I'll go over the seller side. At the top of this form are just two things I want to point out. This is the correct spelling of your names, correct? And this is the correct property address, right? Assuming you get affirmation, you would say something like great or good. And just by way of commentary, you would be surprised how many people will sign papers that have their names or property address incorrect. Better to catch it at the beginning than at the end. And remember, here and throughout the discussion, when the sample script uses the word this, imagine that you as a settlement agent are pointing to the number being discussed. This is your loan amount. It cannot increase after closing. This is your interest rate. Likewise, it cannot change after closing. It's fixed. This is your monthly payment of principal and interest only. This is not your monthly mortgage payment. As you will see later on down the page, your monthly payment also includes an escrow for taxes and insurance, which can change. You will also note that you have a prepayment penalty. If you pay off the loan during the first 2 years, you have to pay a fee up to that amount right there. This section covers your monthly payments. Here again is your principal and interest, and as you can see, it remains constant throughout the life of your loan. Here you see that you have a mortgage insurance premium that disappears at year 8. You also have an escrow for property taxes and homeowners insurance, currently estimated at about over $206 per month. These amounts can increase or decrease over time, and if so, your monthly payment increases or decreases. Adding it all together, your current monthly payment is $1,050.26. Is that what you were expecting? Now, as a commentary, just remember that the monthly payment is critical to the consumer. Pausing to confirm that this is what the consumer was expecting is a good idea. And if it's not what the consumer was expecting, then something may have gone wrong that needs to be addressed.